we've been talking about mindful living. Now, a very crucial part of mindful living is mindful eating. How many of us do we really take out the time to experience the food we eat? It's mostly always in a rush. Breakfast is, a quick bite. Lunch is maybe in a cafeteria, again, very, very quickly over a work call, or sitting in front of the computer while with us, we're typing away a story and we're, eating lunch. None of us really, or most of us rather, I wouldn't say none of us, most of us treat food as something that we have to eat, to survive. We don't really apply our mind as we go about our day and as we go about our meals. But mindful eating is actually a concept with its roots in Buddhist teachings. Just like there are different forms of meditation that involves sitting, breathing, standing, and walking, Buddhist teachers encourage their students to meditate with food. Well, today, to expand our consciousness about food is Dharmacharya Shantum Seth. He's a Buddhist scholar and a practitioner, a consultant with the World Bank and the IFC, and of course he's contributed to a number of books, including Walking with the Buddha, Planting Seeds, Sharing Mindfulness with Children, and Volunteers Against Conflict. Can we please have Dharmacharya Shantum Seth on stage, please? Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause, please. We've had a very energetic start to the day, and it's only getting better.
Thank you very much. Is this... Hello, can you hear me? It's okay. Thank you very much. It's been very interesting being here in this rather corporate club, which we are not used to very much in our monasteries. But I think what's interesting yesterday, what I noticed was really that there's a lot of goodwill in people in themselves, wanting to do good in the country, for their workforce, and of course for themselves and their family. And I want to actually thank Kalipuri and Monty Chadda for actually bringing into this sort of corporate world the understanding of mindfulness, the understanding of better relations with the family and with their workmates. And I think it's quite revolutionary, or it seems to be revolutionary. For me it's very obvious, but it's something which is now being seen more and more importantly. And I think in India Inc., it's an important step that's being made here. There's a very famous Zen story which says there's a man riding a horse, and the guy asks, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I don't know, ask the horse." And this is very much the life of many of us. We, whether it's fame, ambition, money, which is what is driving us, and we don't even have the reins in our hand. And now with the horse getting even faster with technology, with iPads and iPhones, etc., really we are on a 24/7 rotation, not really knowing how to handle it. And what is happening, as was clearly demonstrated this morning and also by both the speakers, is the level of stress is increasing tremendously, and people are not knowing how to handle it. And stress is leading to depression. The WHO says that's the largest, the highest cause of disease now. 121 million people are in that situation now. And it's an increasing level of disease and disability that's happening because of stress. So just stepping back for a moment and saying, how do you handle it? There was this person, this teacher, who, what's your name? Shweta. Shweta referred to, called Gautama Buddha, Mr. B, we call him sometimes. And he said, you guys are doing the same thing. He was telling people 2,500 years ago that, you've got problems with your relationships, you've got problems with your stress levels at that time, you've got problems with anger, with irritation. How do you handle it? And he gave a sutra called the Satipatthana Sutra, which is called the 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, which is based on mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of objects of mind, and mindfulness of mind. And so what I'm going to share a little bit about is mindfulness of body, which is to do with the breath. And as Sadhguru was just demonstrating this awareness of breath, bringing us back to the present moment, as somebody said in the audience. And then from that going into eating. I think it's also interesting, the last time I spoke at the same panel as the previous speaker, it was something called, I think, WP, a World Presidents Organization. And I'd spoken to the Buddha as a CEO. And it reminded me just now, because I felt that the Buddha actually was one of the most successful CEOs in the world. He started an organization 2,600 years ago. It's probably the oldest running organization. Within it, it has methods of negotiation, conflict resolution, all sorts of different models which help an organization to work and which has succeeded for so long. And I think it's important that to recognize that that's an Indian model. It's not a Western model. It's an Indian model, and now it's being emulated around the world, but we are missing the boat. And we've missed the boat for nearly 1,000 years, and we're missing it again and again. And we're getting interested in these things because the West is getting interested. But I think we have the basic raw material, and once that seed in our consciousness is watered, it'll flower. We wanted this session to be slightly more practical, slightly more participatory. I know that we were doing a program with the teachers and children and parents of Vasant Valley School a few months ago, and I think Mrs. Puri was there, and she had a mindful meal. And she told me yesterday something like, that was the best meal of my life, or something to that effect. I don't know what the words were exactly, but something to that. And I said, did you manage again? She said, no. So I said, well, let's try again today, and let's see whether we'll do one exercise, which will be an exercise with a raisin, with one kishmish. And then with that, we can then go further into questions and then look into the wider ramifications of mindful living. Many people talk about formal meditation. I'll just backtrack a bit before we get into it, because many people talk about formal meditation. We're trying to develop a center in Dehradun on mindfulness practice. We live in monasteries. And our whole life is very much based in mindfulness. Whatever we do, whether it's waking up in the morning, as we're lying in bed, we are aware of the body on the bed, the position of the body, the breath, when we move our feet off the bed onto the ground and touch the ground, when we walk to the toilet, when we brush our teeth, everything is done in that attentiveness. And in the same way, what you're trying to do at that time is really water that seed of mindfulness. And when you develop or water that seed of mindfulness continuously, what then starts happening is that all your mental formations or your actions are then embraced by mindfulness. Whether it's to do with the telephone, we do telephone meditation. Whether you're on the computer, you do computer meditation. Whether you're driving, you're doing driving meditation. And if you're interested, I'll tell you what telephone meditation is later. So let's focus back on eating. Now, eating, as we know, is at one level a very mundane activity, but the art of mindfulness makes it into a miracle. You know, eating is a miracle. And how do we make eating into miracles? By just that attentiveness. So what I was going to do is, all of us on these tables have some kishmish. I have one too, or two here. Okay, so let's just hold this in the palm of our hand. All of you can have one kishmish each. Not that we are being conjuice about it, it's just that it's better to do with one. You can have more later. And I'm going to invite a bell. This bell is the bell which allows us to come back to our breathing, allows us to calm the mind. And then as we have the kishmish in our hand, I would like you to just contemplate the kishmish and see or feel or hear or touch what is it that the kishmish is telling you. And I'll walk you through it. So let the sound of the bell penetrate into your breathing, and let the breathing link your body and mind together. So let your mind be a breathing mind, not a thinking mind. And as you use your breath to come back into the present moment, be attentive to the kishmish in your hand, and just look at it as you've never looked at it before. This is the first time you've probably seen that kishmish. And after seeing it, feel it. You can even smell it. And then slowly, if you want, put it in your mouth, but not chew it immediately. Just let it feel in your mouth, and then slowly chew it, and let the juice run. See where on the tongue it tastes, and then let it slowly go into your stomach. You can do this with the eyes closed. It's probably better. So, dear friends, it's probably the first time you've eaten a kishmish like that. And it'll be nice to hear from anybody what you saw or felt or smelt. I didn't put it next to your ear, but you can even hear food sometimes. This morning I had breakfast and I put milk onto a bowl of muesli and I suddenly heard crackle, crackle. And so I'd just be interested in knowing if anybody would like to share what they felt or saw or smelt in it. Would anybody do you have a mic somewhere? Okay, so dumbstruck. Okay, don't worry. I think the essence of this. What would you like to share something? Please.
Yeah, my feeling is, I would suggest that before you started this exercise, I had a few raisins of my own, in fact, and I was completely absent-minded. I was focusing on your talk and eating. But when you asked me to feel it in your hand, then smell, and then eat, I would think, before you started the exercise, I had at least 10 or 15 raisins, in fact, and I was not feeling that full. But once you started the exercise with one raisin, in fact, especially after the smell, and then put my mouth, it was an awesome feeling, in fact. I thought that, everything was, it was evolved kind of feeling that, the taste, the smell, and I could sense somewhere here. I don't know what happened, but it was a very different feeling. And I was feeling that is a presence, I'm present while eating. prior to that, I was absent while eating. So I could sense, that the kishmish is going and, mixing with my blood. I cannot explain that. That's why nobody's able to speak this. But I just thought to give some words to this.
No,
Completely different feeling, yeah.
No, thank you. Anybody else like to share? Lady at the back.
I think for the first time I actually felt the taste buds on my tongue and the ridges on my palate. So not so much the kishmish, but I sort of felt like my tongue and my palate were like, there. Yeah.
नहीं वहाँ पर
It gave me a similar feeling when I do meditation, and also when I was actually having it, it gave me a sort of a feeling of divinity.
Feeling of?
More close to when you are praying or when you are close to divinity sort of thing.
Yes, we always miss something. I think we can look at this as a practice. A practice is something which both has something in terms of a sensorial experience, but it also has a spiritual dimension to it. So in some senses, what you've shared is partly sensorial, the element of the taste, whether it's the feeling on the tongue. But as you go deeper, you also start getting a sense of spiritual experience. And the spiritual experience is some ways linked to things like the understanding that you are not separate from the universe or the cosmos. If you look deeply into that raisin again, you will see that the whole universe is in that raisin. Whether it's the sunshine, whether it's the farmer who grew the grapes, whether it's the person who processed it, whether it's the earth, whether it's the people who brought it in that tray or katori, all that is part of this. And if you take away one element from that kishmish is not where it would be, including where your parents are, who's brought you up, all the different experiences of life. And so what we start seeing is that in this one very simple act of eating, we are actually ingesting or becoming aware that we are part of a universal, interconnected reality. That actually is the awareness that the Buddha lived with. Whenever he did anything, it was not that, everyone has Buddha nature. Everyone can become awake. Buddha doesn't mean some guy who lives 2,600 years ago. It means somebody or some potential in all of us to awaken. In fact, the word Buddha, as we know, is just mean to awaken. So in a way, we are all little part-time Buddhas. Even eating that one raisin, you become a little part-time Buddha for that moment. And the thing is to really awaken to each moment. As the earlier speaker was saying, of course, we do suffer and we do create our own realities to a large degree. But the level of experience that we can have with anything is up to us. And it depends on our own awareness and our own mindfulness. And it doesn't happen like this. It happens with practice. Roger Federer doesn't become the greatest tennis player, arguably the greatest tennis player, by just, manifesting like this. He practices every day. And it's the same with this. But here the bottom line is happiness and peace. It's a slightly different bottom line to what many of us are injected into feeling is our important bottom line. But actually, if we question ourselves, the bottom line is happiness and peace for ourselves and those around us. And we also realize happiness is not an individual matter. If my daughter is not happy, if my wife is not happy, if my workmate is not happy, then I'm not happy. It is not something which only I cultivate for myself. And so this becomes a corporate culture, it becomes a family culture. And so eating, when we sit in a monastery or we actually eat in silence. Most of us, when we meet to eat as a family, we often talk, and it's a very pleasant time to talk. But we try not to talk about negative things. And also, very often we're distracted. Many of us may be eating the movie on TV, or the conversation we are having, or the newspaper we are reading. Actually, we're not eating the food at all. And as the gentleman very, bravely said, yeah, he'd eaten 10 kishmish without, because his mind was actually what I was saying. So sometimes it's helpful to be silent to when you eat. But of course people say, but eat, that's the time when I meet my family. So what we do is we have, instead of like in a monastery where we have 20 minutes of silence, we have 5 minutes of silence, or a few minutes of silence, which allows us to start by looking at the food in a very conscious way. Sometimes like a little child might mention, say, oh, bean, dal, rice. Same way, we look at it and we just notice it, we note it. We also note the people with us, who are around us. It's not just an individual activity of eating. We are aware and grateful that they are here with us at this time, eating. It could be our family. And it doesn't take 2 hours or maximum amount of time to be with that person, just a glimpse. And to feel that you can eat in happiness, or you can eat in some sort of conflict-free situation at the very least. In families where you can't smile at each other, there's something going on. In a workplace where you can't smile at each other, there's something going on, which is not very healthy. And that's where you're spending most of your time. So the thing is to cultivate that sense of mindfulness and happiness and awareness to whatever we are doing. So in fact, actually we have we actually say few words before we start, which helps sometimes. Something like, this food is the gift of the whole universe, the earth, the sky, and much hard work. And may we live in such a way as to be worthy to receive it, and may we transform our unskillful states of mind and learn to eat in moderation. May we take only foods that nourish us and prevent illness, and we receive this food to walk on the path of understanding and love. And it's like a sort of grace, but really reminding us that this, whatever it is, whether it's a roti or whether it's a kishmish or whether it's our water, is actually connected to the universe, and that we can eat in moderation, we can live in a healthy way. But why are we living? Really to help others, but also the other thing that it develops in us is compassion. When we look at an empty plate, we are also aware that there are many people, especially in our country, who don't have food. And that we really are very lucky to have this food and good food with us. Again, it's not trying to put a guilt trip on us, but just, when you feel a sense of compassion, that is an energy that allows us to act. And as you work in a company or as a family, as a sangha, as a community, you can actually think out ways of how you can help others in a compassionate way. Compassion is a wonderful energy. It's a very strong energy. But not to just feel, how do you say, sort of disempowered by it. It's actually an energy of action. And the same, you're also putting the energy of loving kindness, of offering, help to others. So these are the sort of elements that you're trying to develop, even in a simple act like eating. We have a few verses, I just wrote them down. So this writing, so looking at an empty plate, for example, when you start your meal. So I'm coming here because it's light and I couldn't hear you also. It's okay if I'm closer? Okay. So I'll go up here so you can. So looking at the empty plate, it says, my plate, empty now, will soon be filled with precious food. And this is a practice of gratitude. Just knowing that I have good food and, this gift to eat. And then the second short verse was the serving of the food, when you're serving your food. In this food, I clearly see the presence of the entire universe supporting my existence. So this is a very deep practice, this practice of what we call dependent arising, of dependent origination. It's a core, not just Buddhist teaching, but it's a core teaching of many, many spiritual traditions. I know it's coming from Buddhism, that's my tradition, in the Zen tradition. But it's really understanding that everything is interconnected. And then we contemplate the food, which is on our plate. So this plate of food, so fragrant and appetizing, also contains much suffering. Again, it is that element of compassion that I was mentioning about, that, where people are hungry. And I think that's something which I really feel it's something we can cultivate. And it's like mindfulness we can cultivate. And it's interesting, what's been happening now in America more so, and I want it to happen in India, is there have been tests going on mindfulness practice. But 15 years ago, this whole new era of neuroplasticity came up, and now epigenetics. What's happening is people are realizing that certain parts of the brain, when you're mindful, get more, the gray matter density gets gets denser. It's called the hippocampus, it's in the prefrontal cortex. And this is the area of the brain which is there for memory, for concentration, for well-being, for self-awareness. All this is developed by just simple mindfulness. And there's another part of the brain, it's called the amygdala, which is there, which is really controls stress, and there the great anxiety, and there the great matter density decreases. And from what? From just mindful walking, mindful eating, mindful telephone conversations. So again, and this is done in 8 weeks. We've done these things with biotech, with the biotech company. There were, for 8 weeks, some people were taken, and there were scientific studies done in the University of Wisconsin, and they found this within 8 weeks, there was a shift in the brain structure. So now what it's been Indian, common knowledge of a sort amongst the rishis and the gurus and also the common people is now being authenticated by the West. So in fact, in October, we were having a discussion with Harvard Medical School. I was there with Harvard Medical School talking about the usefulness of mindfulness on depression and other things. And now in England, it's the National Health Service is actually allowing you, the doctors can now recommend 8 weeks of mindfulness to overcome depression. So this is what is Indian, Gyan now being authenticated and coming back to us. But it's great. I mean, I think that's why we're here. That's why the corporate Inc. is now asking for this here. We've known it. But I think the more we cultivate it and we make our organizations into organisms rather than, and look at, and then when we begin to eat, I just wrote something like, this is what is called for Brahma Vihara. This is something which we try and cultivate every day in our lives. With the first bite, I promise to offer joy. With the second, what is that? Oh, there. Okay. The problem with the bell is that I stop. It's very habituated. I come back to my breathing and I smile. So I'll tell you about telephone meditation. So should I finish? That's it? Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you about the bell. A telephone, all of us use a telephone all the time, okay? So when I hear the bell, in our monasteries or in our center we're trying to build up in Dehradun, and you're all welcome to come be part of that if you ever want to. And we're also trying to bring mindfulness to school education. That's what Ms. Puri and I were involved in. When you hear a bell, you just you pause, and you bring your mind to your breath. So the first thing is always to come back to your breathing, to come back into the present moment. The present moment is the only time you have any control about. The past is gone, the future is an idea. So it's only now that you have any control. So we come back to our breathing, come back to bring our body and mind to the present moment, and then we act. So the first bell is stop, the second bell is breathe, and the third bell is smile. So I do this on my telephone now. So if anybody rings me, including Prerna and others, Mrs. Kohli, I'll never pick up my phone for at least 3 rings. So my telephone becomes my bell of meditation. So I call it telephone meditation. Stop, breathe, smile. And you watch the difference that is in your life. This wonderful gadget of communication actually becomes not an interruption, but it becomes a way of pausing. And one of the big causes of dysfunction in our lives is not pausing enough. Of course, reflection is the next step, but pausing at least many times a day. So use the telephone as a pause, use your food as a pause, use the fact that you can see your baby and your child or your friends as a pause, the sunset, everything. You just see the miracle in the mundane. Whether it's a step, or whether it's a smile, or whether it's a dog, anything can become your bell of mindfulness. And for me, like when I put my key in the door when I get home, that is my bell of mindfulness. I stop, I pause, a breath, 2 breaths. It doesn't take much time, 1 or 2 seconds. But I'm transitioning from outside, work life. So just create these pauses in your life, if that's the only message you can have. But enjoy your eating and enjoy each moment. But by coming back to the moment, using your breath to link your mind and body. Thank you very much.
We have time for 2 questions from the audience. Anybody? Anyone, any questions for Mr. Seth here?
Please.
Over there. Let's wait for a mic, please.
How does one inculcate mindfulness, of course, in ourselves and our children, because that's very important, that they at least learn to, as Sadhguru said, not be on the rack like we are. So what do you suggest about mindfulness and children, basically?
Yeah. Well, what's your name? Ritu. Ritu's asking a crucially important question. In fact, I was working with the UN for about 17 years, and when I was 50, I gave myself a gift, and I said, that's my big cow I have to let go of. And I said, what do I really want to make the world a better place? And I said, mindfulness and education. So in fact, that's what we're doing. We're realizing that as kids, I never learned how to handle my fear, my jealousy, my anger, and I became part of the problem. And so what we're trying to do with kids is really doing that. If we've done a book, which it's my only copy, so I would have happily given it, but you can get it in the market. It's called Planting Seeds, Practicing Mindfulness with Children. We have lesson plans, the works. You can do things with parents, and it's giving a little bit of the scientific background, but much more practical things, like raisin meditation is in here. We're doing things like pebble meditation. You know, what we do with kids, we take them and say, okay, let's choose some pebbles. And we make one pebble a flower, and one pebble a mountain, and one pebble water, one pebble a space. And then they'll come and paint it and things like that. Then we come back into the class, and then we'll say, okay, hold that. And we start this very young in kids. Huh? So hold, because they have to be tactile. And they say, while you're holding it, then just see yourself as a flower. Don't imagine a flower outside of you, but become the flower. And it's so sweet, you know. And then you hear everyone what flower they've become, and they can just 3 breaths, 4 breaths, and then you hold on the next. Or see the solidity of a mountain. See yourself as a mountain. But why? Because what we want them to do with the flower is to feel freshness. We can do it any time. We can become fresh. We can become solid. You know, when you see the strong emotions that come in your mind, children don't know that emotion is just something which arises and falls away. You know, we're never taught this in school. So we become suicidal. I mean, you know, all this stuff happens. But it's just an emotion rising and falling. So what we're doing, it's like a tree. If you see a tree and there's a big storm on the tree, the top of the tree is moving all over the place, but the bottom is solid. So we just tell them to come back to their breathing in the abdomen as kids. Breathing in, I know I'm solid. Breathing out, I smile. So the emotions will pass. So these are sort of techniques through game, through play, and then we'll do things like make a song. You know, and like breathing in, I see myself as a flower. Breathing out, I feel solid. You know, see myself as a mountain. And then all the kids start doing it. So in fact, we want, and parents can do it all the time. And you know, parents, of course, are the greatest mirrors. I mean, children mirror us. But if we are mindful, that's the best. But I always think school is a second chance. What's happened now is that so many families are becoming dysfunctional that I realize it's better to work with schools. And there are a few really enlightened teachers. I mean, in fact, this school that they run, Vasant Valley, was one of the first schools we took as a model school. And we did 7 days, with 3 days with kids, 3 days with teachers, and 1 day with parents. And we see the whole community, the whole school is a community. The guard, the person who's serving the food, everything. So the whole environment for the child, as he or she walks into school, is a mindful environment. And then, as I was saying, from the body you move to the feelings, being aware of your feelings. How often have we been taught how to be aware of our feelings as kids? You know, and express the feeling, maybe name the feeling. And then once you do that, this practice of mindfulness, where what you do is you embrace all these. In Buddhist psychology, basically we have all these different seeds, whether it's anger, forgiveness, greed, hate, love, all in our store consciousness, including mindfulness. So when we water the seed of mindfulness, then we embrace that particular emotion. So children are taught to do that. And then they just sit with it and say, and so it becomes a game. So there are lots of exercises. This is easy to get, and if you ever want to be in touch, we want to do this we want to bring it into mainstream Indian curriculum in 5 years, or 8 years. We need to do some research on it, but I think it can, and it's happening. I'm teaching these things in America, and they're saying, come and set up your center there. I'm saying, no, we want to do it in India. So we did some fancy school, Phillips Exeter Academy, they want to do it. In San Diego, they want to do it. But please, in India, we should do it, you know. And I think that's the way for India to bring its old wisdom instead of just following the P1, P2 model.
Well, I'm sure there are several more questions to ask. We can continue this conversation over tea. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me just say the raisins have never tasted better.